The story begins with what seems to be the protagonist running frantically through the dark, suffocating passages of a dungeon. His breath grows heavier with each step, his expression twisted by visible stress and despair. The faint light of the cave walls offers him no escape, and when he finally reaches the end of the narrow path, his heart sinks. The way forward is completely blocked by collapsed rocks. Cursing his own misfortune, he realizes that he has nowhere left to run. At that very moment, the echo of multiple footsteps resounds from the darkness behind him. The sound grows louder, accompanied by guttural growls and sinister laughter. Soon a horde of goblins emerges from the shadows, their twisted figures and malicious grins confirming the worst. The young man turns around, his face pale with dread, and instinctively shouts at them not to come any closer. Trembling, he stumbles backward, desperately pleading for anyone to help him. Just when it seems that his end is inevitable, the goblins are suddenly cut down in an instant. Their bodies collapse lifelessly to the ground, slain by three figures who step confidently into view. They are adventurers armed and boasting an air of arrogance that makes their superiority evident. The protagonist recognizes them immediately, though the relief he feels quickly fades when their mocking laughter fills the cave. They know him, and they have nothing but contempt for him. With cruel smiles, they ridicule his lack of strength, jeering at his pitiful magical power. One of them calls him an unranked weakling, not even qualified to be classified as rank E. Their scorn cuts deeper than the danger of the goblins. Yet Tenchai, the protagonist, whose name is finally revealed, approaches them with a gentle expression and a kind smile. Instead of reacting with anger, he humbly offers them tea from the small set he carries, making sure they are not thirsty after their battle. His kindness is met only with more derision. The leader of the trio, clearly the most arrogant of them, sneers at Tenchai and insults him outright, claiming that trash as weak as him is fated to live clinging to stronger people for the rest of his life. With a cruel grin, the bully launches into a speech, his voice echoing in the cavern as if his words were law. He recalls how, 20 years ago, the mysterious cubes descended from the heavens across the entire world. It was then, he says, that humans were blessed with the gift of magical power, changing the fate of mankind forever. But he makes it clear that this blessing was never meant for everyone. Not all humans were treated equally by the heavens. Some, like him, were chosen, born with vast reserves of power that allowed them to rise as high-ranking adventurers. Others, however, like Tenchai, were cursed to remain powerless, without rank, doomed to live in weakness and mediocrity. The bully boasts that people like him can easily conquer dungeons, harvesting magic stones from slain monsters and selling them for great profit. Meanwhile, the powerless are destined only for useless, meaningless tasks. His voice turns even more venomous as he begins to speak ill of Tenchai's sister, mocking her as if she were no more than a burden. At those words, Tenchai's gentle expression finally shatters. Suddenly his eyes harden and his face contorts with hatred and a seriousness that he rarely allows himself to show. Noticing this change, the leader reacts with rage. Without hesitation, he kicks Tenchai brutally in the face, knocking him down and laughing at his audacity. Standing over him, he spits trash talk, ordering Tenchai to crawl into a dungeon alone if he truly wishes to gather magic stones, implying that his life is worth no more than that. In this world, the cubes are objects of endless mystery. They are gateways to alternate spaces filled with countless monsters, known to all as dungeon. Each cube is unique, and the strength of the monsters within varies depending on the dungeon itself. To bring order, humanity classified them by levels of danger, ranging from the most perilous, rank S, to the weakest, rank E. Tenchai, despite his own weakness, reflects bitterly on how much the world has changed since the appearance of the cubes and how entire societies were reshaped. The Dungeon Association was founded, charged with exploring and conquering these worlds. Adventurers with extraordinary magical power became the heroes of a new age, wielding abilities that surpassed the limits of ordinary humans. New technologies flourished, economies adapted to the trade of magical resources, and life itself began to resemble the fantastical worlds once seen only in games. Yet, in this world that glorifies strength and power, there are those like Tenchai, people who were given almost nothing by fate, forced to survive with kindness, humility, and a will that refuses to break. Even under the cruel weight of mockery, Once Tenchai and his companions finally stepped out of the cube, the arrogant bully handed him the portion of money that supposedly corresponded to him. However, instead of delivering it with even a shred of decency, he deliberately let the bills fall to the ground, smirking with mockery as if humiliating Tenchai gave him some twisted satisfaction. Without another word, he turned his back and left, heading home, while muttering bitterly that if a god truly existed, stating that such a deity would never bless all humans equally. He believed himself not blessed but rather condemned, for he had been born without any trace of magical power and carrying what he considered a cruel curse. When Tenchai finally returned home, he was welcomed by the cheerful smile of his younger sister Nagi, who greeted him with excitement. Concern immediately clouded Tenchai's face, and he gently reminded her that she should not be out of bed and needed to continue resting. Yet Nagi, radiating unusual energy, insisted that she felt wonderful that day, claiming she could move her body without any of the usual difficulty. In the middle of her enthusiasm, however, her fragile condition betrayed her. She slipped unexpectedly and collapsed forward only to be caught safely in her brother's arm. Tenchai's eyes widened with concern as he asked if she was all right, advising her not to push herself too much. Nagi, however, simply offered him a grateful smile, softly thanking him for always being there. It is then revealed that Nagi suffers from a severe and incurable disease known as amyotrophic magical solidification, commonly abbreviated as AMS. Tenchai explains that this illness is one of the cruel afflictions that the so-called god released upon humanity when the appearance of the cubes changed the world forever. These cubes granted humankind access to magical power, and many individuals awakened extraordinary abilities, transforming into beings who surpassed normal humans in strength and skill. Yet, while some were blessed, others were cursed. Those born with little to no magical capacity became unbearably fragile. Every movement, no matter how small, consumed what little magic they had within them, leaving them weaker day by day. AMS is a particularly devastating condition. In those afflicted, the magical energy that the body should naturally regenerate is instead stolen by parasitic crystalline stones that grow inside them. These stones feed on magic, preventing the body from restoring the power required for even the simplest of movements. As the disease progresses, patients gradually lose all motor functions, until eventually they cannot even move a single finger. There exists no known cure. The only treatment available consists of frequent blood transfusions, through which magical power can temporarily be supplied to the patient's body. Unfortunately, the situation is growing worse. Hospitals across the land are now overwhelmed due to the sudden surge in the number of AMS patients, and as demand for magical transfusions rises, obtaining them has become increasingly difficult. For Tenchai, this reality weighs heavily on his heart. For every day he must watch his beloved sister fight against an illness that no healer, no mage, and no god has been able to cure. Nagi notices the wounds on her brother's arm. He does not give them much importance, but Nagi, very worried, tells him they must treat them. She decides to put saliva on them so they heal. She realizes that her brother has many wounds, but he tells her that they are honorable medals for the sake of his sister. So she simply thanks him and both decide to make dinner. The two eat happily, and he tells her to chew well and digest her food as she must grow healthy. But she sweetly also tells him to eat a lot, and gives him spoonfuls of rice trying to feed him. Unfortunately, due to the symptoms of the disease, her hand becomes paralyzed and she accidentally drops the rice. Immediately she apologizes since that is the food her brother works hard for. But Tenchai picks up the rice and eats it, commenting that it is very delicious, which makes his sister very happy. At night, while she sleeps, Tenchai is awake, unable to fall asleep. In his mind, he only tells himself that he must keep going. He cannot give up working in the dungeons since the study of the disease is still in development. He firmly believes that one day the cure will be discovered, and until then he needs money to keep medicating his sister so that the symptoms do not worsen. With a firm attitude, Tenchai promises to save his sister for the sake of their parents. The following day, Tenchai's fragile world takes another blow. The leader of the group, the same arrogant bully who constantly ridiculed him, summons Tenchai with a disdainful smirk etched across his face. Without hesitation, he delivers the devastating words, "Tenchai is fired." At first, Tenchai freezes, utterly confused. The statement doesn't register, and he asks why, hoping for at least a shred of reasoning. But instead of receiving an explanation, the bully sneers and mocks him once more, snapping sarcastically and asking if Tenchai had suddenly gone deaf. With a tone dripping with arrogance, he declares that adventurers with true skill and potential cannot afford to waste time associating with dead weight. Weaklings like Tenchai only ruin his image, and he refuses to let such shame tarnish his path as he strives to climb to the very top of the adventurer's ranks. Tenchai's face pales, his chest tightening with desperation. In a trembling voice, he begs for another chance, promising to do twice the work, even more if necessary, just so that he won't be cast aside. His pleas, however, are met with cold indifference. The bully leader smirks cruelly and tells him that even doubling his effort would mean nothing, because what they want are competent, capable adventurers, not someone as powerless and pitiful as him. Driven to the edge of despair, Tenchai finally snaps. With uncharacteristic boldness, he steps forward and grips the bully by the shoulders, his voice cracking as he insists that this cannot happen. His sister depends on him, and without the money, her already fragile life will crumble. For a fleeting second, there is silence. But then, without the faintest trace of sympathy, the bully shoves him backward with casual force, sending a clear message of disdain. His eyes are devoid of empathy as he delivers the final insult. Whether Tenchai dies in a dungeon or rots away working at some nameless farm, the result will be the same. Either way, his fate is pathetic and meaningless. With cruel laughter, the group departs, leaving Tenchai alone with his struggle. Left with no other choice, Tenchai decides to try his luck elsewhere, desperately hoping to find another group that might accept him. He clutches his worn adventurer introduction card and approaches a wandering adventurer, politely offering it. But the man barely spares him a glance before pushing it back into his hands, muttering dismissively that he should try somewhere else. Still refusing to give up, Tenchai heads to the reception desk of the Adventurers Guild, placing all his remaining hope in the kind-faced receptionist. With hesitation in his voice, he asks if there are any teams recruiting new members. The young woman frowns apologetically, explaining that with such a low rank, it would be extremely difficult, almost impossible for him to be accepted into any group. Tenchai insists that he doesn't mind doing menial work, even something as insignificant as carrying luggage, if only he could be allowed to contribute. Yet her answer does not change. With genuine regret, she apologizes again, her eyes lowering, and tells him that there is nothing she can do. Crushed by rejection after rejection, Tenchai drags himself home after a day that felt heavier than any dungeon he had ever entered. The weight of despair presses down on him, but the moment he steps through the door, his burdens momentarily fade. Waiting for him, as always, is his beloved younger sister Nagi. She is seated on a chair, quietly absorbed in reading a book, her frail figure illuminated by the gentle glow of the setting sun. Upon seeing her brother, she immediately sets the book aside, rushes forward with a bright smile, and embraces him warmly. With innocent delight, she comments that he seems to have finished work earlier than usual today. Tenchai's heart twists because he cannot bear to let her see the truth, to burden her with the harshness of his day. So he swallows his pain, forcing a smile onto his face, and replies with fabricated cheer. He tells her that work went smoothly, that his team cleared a dungeon with ease thanks to his efforts, and that everything turned out well. Every word is a lie, but it is a lie born not of selfishness but of love and the desperate attempt of a brother who wishes to protect his sister from worry, even if it means hiding the reality. The next day, the struggle continues. Tenchai goes outside to try his luck to be able to join a group. But as expected, he is knocked down by all the adventurers who just by seeing him get disgusted for him being a weakling without a rank. He keeps trying, but wherever he goes only negative comments can be heard, calling him weakling and mocking him brutally. This eventually lowers his morale and deteriorates his mentality, so he goes back home once again with no good results. When he arrives home, his sister Nagi notices the same pattern over and over again. She is visibly worried and questions him that today he has arrived earlier than usual from work. But upon seeing him acting very strange, she tells him that he has been working very hard lately and that maybe he should take a rest. So she proposes that they play cards for a while just to get distracted. But Tenchai, with his sanity already lost, yells at her, telling her to just go to sleep already. Because if she worries so much about him, the only thing she has to do is remain silent and sleep to recover. Of course, he is just unloading all his fury against his sister, and things don't end up well. Upon this furious reaction of her brother, she apologizes with tears on her face and leaves the room heartbroken. But Tenchai knows all he's doing is to keep her unaware of his own struggle and only wants her sister to recover as soon as possible. The following day, Tenchai once again set out with the same weary determination that had guided him for weeks. His footsteps echoed the weight of futility. 3 long weeks had already slipped by since he began searching for a guild or a group willing to take him in. Yet not a single opportunity had opened before him. Rejection had become a bitter companion and frustration gnawed at his will. For the first time, he truly began to wonder if perhaps it was time to abandon the dream entirely. Maybe he should resign himself to the path of ordinary part-time jobs, washing dishes, moving boxes, or cleaning floors, anything that could put some coins in his pocket. But deep down, he knew such work would never be enough. No matter how many hours he worked, he would never earn the kind of money that could cover the crushing cost of his sister's treatment. Compared to the riches buried within the cube, the common labor is not worth it. As he wandered lost in these troubling thoughts, the faint scent of bread reached him, guiding his steps toward a small bakery tucked between 2 buildings. Drawn by the inviting smell, Tenchai stepped inside. He approached the saleswoman and asked for 2 strawberry shortcakes, remembering how much his sister adored them. Yet as he opened his thin, battered wallet, reality struck him like a dagger. His money was running dangerously low. So with a reluctant sigh, he changed his order to just 1 slice. The decision weighed on him more than it should have, since it was another reminder that he was basically broke. Later, he returned home carrying the small box as though it were a treasure. With a faint smile, he called out to Nagi that he had brought her favorite cake. He expected the sound of light footsteps rushing toward him, or the familiar soft voice of Nagi filled with excitement. But no answer came, because the silence in the house was suffocating, thick enough to make him feel uneasy. Stepping further inside, his breath caught in his throat. Nagi was lying motionless on the floor. Her delicate body collapsed as though life had already abandoned it. The box slipped from his hands, the strawberry cake tumbling and splattering uselessly onto the ground. He dropped to his knees beside her, shaking her, calling her name and begging for a response that never came. The scene shifted in a blur of sirens and flashing lights. An ambulance carried her fragile body away as paramedics worked frantically. Tenchai could only watch in helpless terror, clinging to the desperate hope that she would survive. But when they reached the hospital, the truth became undeniable. Nagi's condition had deteriorated at an alarming pace, and she was rushed into intensive care. The sterile lights of the hospital corridors burned into Tenchai's eyes as he waited, every second dragging like eternity. At last, the doors of the emergency room swung open, and the doctor stepped out with a grave expression. Tenchai jumped to his feet, desperation etched across his face. But he was asking him first to calm down and listen carefully. His words fell like hammer blows, because he just revealed that Nagi's condition had worsened beyond what they had anticipated. The illness had advanced into stage 3, which an irreversible stage, and she basically would never awake again. The statement struck Tenchai like lightning. His chest tightened, his breath faltered, and his thoughts scattered into disbelief. His trembling voice asked if there was truly nothing at all they could do. The doctor explained that the only way to keep her alive, at least physically, would be through constant blood transfusion. Yet even this sliver of hope was poisoned by reality. There was a worldwide shortage of transfusible blood, a crisis caused by the overwhelming surge of EMS patients. Procuring such a treatment would not only be nearly impossible, but would also come at an astronomical cost. Worse still, EMS was a disease with no cure in sight, so no promise of recovery. Finally, the doctor delivered the final blow. The treatment, if Tenchai could even secure it, would cost 10 million yen. The words echoed endlessly in his mind, collapsing the fragile scaffolding of hope he had tried so hard to build. He stood there in silence, swallowed by shock, unable to grasp how his world had so suddenly unraveled. Tenchai, completely devastated by the doctor's words, sat motionless in the cold hospital room where his sister was now resting. The rhythmic beeping of the machines attached to her frail body echoed in his ears like a cruel reminder of her fragile existence. His head hung low. It felt as though every ounce of strength he had been clinging to had finally abandoned him. He muttered broken words to the ceiling, as if speaking to God himself. His voice cracked, filled with pain. He asked why was he destined to endure this torment, And must he lose his sister after already being stripped of his parents? What kind of cruel fate had been prepared for him? The thought of carrying this burden alone crushed him, and his heart screamed against the injustice of it all. He begged for an answer, for a reason, for some fragment of mercy to fall upon him. And then, as though the heavens themselves had responded, a sudden flash of light from the television caught his eye. The broadcast changed to breaking news. A female reporter appeared on the screen, her voice urgent and trembling with anticipation. She announced the unimaginable. In Shibuya, a phenomenon never before seen in human history had just occurred. A rare and mysterious golden cube had materialized. The reporter went on to explain that the Dungeon Association was urgently recruiting adventurers and groups to challenge this newly discovered golden dungeon. The mere act of participating promised an immediate reward of 5 million yen, and those who managed to clear the dungeon successfully would receive a staggering 10 million in total. The screen shifted to the leader of the Dungeon Association, who addressed the world with solemn authority. He explained that the Golden Cube was unlike any other. Its existence defied all previous knowledge. For this reason, the association had chosen to remove all formal requirements for entry. Rank, experience, skill, all of it was meaningless here because the only condition was courage, determination, bravery, and the will to face the unknown would decide who could step inside. Tenchai stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. At first silence filled him. Then slowly, a bitter laugh escaped his lips. His voice, hoarse yet tinged with a strange defiance, muttered that this must be what people called a helping hand from God. It was as if fate, after dragging him into the depths of despair, had extended one last chance, a final lifeline. He knew the truth. An unexplored cube meant peril beyond imagination. Everything inside would be unknown. The traps, the monsters, the tests, no one could predict what awaited. The chances of survival would likely be less than 50%, maybe even worse. But this time even failure offered salvation. Just by participating, he would receive 5 million yen, and that alone was already half of what he needed. With newfound determination, Tenchai rose from his seat and slipped on his worn jacket, his movements heavy yet purposeful. His eyes burned with resolve as he whispered to himself that no matter how absurd or dangerous this path might be, he had no choice but to face it. He would enter the Golden Cube, and he would return with the money that could awaken his sister. The sudden emergence of the Golden Cube ignited a frenzy across the world. Honor, greed, curiosity, and desperation drew people together. 72 challengers, each carrying their own dreams, ambitions, and scars, gathered before the shining gateway of the unknown. They were hailed as conquerors in the making, bound by the same unspoken truth. Glory awaited only the bold. But in the silence behind that golden light, destiny had already written its cruel verdict. Out of the 72 who dared to enter, only 2 would survive in the end. Tenchai finally arrived at the long-awaited gathering where dozens of adventurers had assembled, each eager to test their strength against the enigmatic Golden Cube. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, the air heavy with both excitement and rivalry. It was then that a familiar figure emerged from the crowd, a man Tenchai once knew as a companion. His name was Sato. Sato wasted no time in rekindling old hostility. With a mocking grin, he asked whether Tenchai had already found another group to cling to, accusing him of being nothing more than a burden. He went on to boast that his own party would soon be venturing into the Golden Cube, flaunting their supposed superiority. As he turned to leave, he overheard Tenchai calmly declaring his intent to enter the dungeon as well. The words struck a nerve. Enraged, Sato whirled back and drove his fist hard into Tenchai's stomach, contempt radiating in his glare. In his mind, Tenchai was nothing but a parasite, someone who would leech off the efforts of others and bring nothing but ruin. His anger boiled over, and he was ready to end Tenchai's ambitions right there and then. Before the situation escalated further, a clear and firm voice cut through the tension. A dark-haired girl stepped forward, her expression calm yet unyielding. She reminded Sato that using skills for violence against others was strictly forbidden. For a moment Sato bristled, demanding to know who she was. But the unease of his own companions betrayed the truth. Whispers spread quickly, and they tugged at his sleeve, urging him to stop. They recognized her, and their hushed voices carried a warning, since crossing her would bring consequences. Clicking his tongue in frustration, Sato relented, but not without leaving his mark. He spat venomous words at Tenchai, calling him trash and sneering that he would serve as nothing more than a human shield. Silence lingered after his departure, broken only when the mysterious girl offered Tenchai her hand, helping him back to his feet. Her tone softened as she asked if he was all right, then curiously inquired whether he too was aiming for the golden cube. Tenchai nodded, returning the question. To his surprise, she shook her head. She confessed that she would not be participating because she could not fight. Before Tenchai could ask more, a man in a sharp suit appeared, calling for her. His name was Tanaka. The girl gave Tenchai a final smile and wished him luck before departing with her companion, leaving Tenchai with a swirl of unanswered questions. Inwardly, Tenchai wondered if her inability to fight meant that she too was an unranked like him. But the thought faded quickly. Deep down, he knew the truth. He was the anomaly here. To throw himself into an unexplored cube with no strength or rank was as close to suicide as one could get. And yet, he could not turn back. No matter how hopeless it seemed, he had a reason to fight. Once all the adventurers had gathered in the square before the golden cube, the man in the immaculate black suit, Tanaka, stepped forward. He climbed onto a raised platform, his voice cutting clearly through the murmuring crowd. With an air of authority, he introduced himself as the vice leader of the renowned guild Avalon and declared that he would personally be leading the expedition. The moment the name left his lips, a ripple of awe swept through the audience. Avalon, Japan's #1 guild, unmatched in both influence and power. The murmurs rose in waves, voices filled with admiration and relief. Their presence alone reassured the restless adventurers. But Tanaka was not alone. A line of American soldiers stood firmly at his back, clad in combat gear, their silent discipline emanating a sense of security. Many in the crowd breathed easier, convinced that with Avalon at the helm and the US military at their side, this expedition would surely be effortless. After the applause and whispers settled, Tanaka raised his hand for silence. His words were steady, commanding yet sincere. He announced that the gate to the cube would soon be opened, and urged all adventurers to stand together, to support one another no matter the danger. He ended his speech with a solemn wish that every soul here might return safely from the unknown that awaited within. At last, the massive golden doors trembled, mechanisms unseen grinding as if awakened from a long slumber. A faint radiance spilled outward, illuminating the crowd's expectant faces. With a deep rumble, the gate to the golden cube opened. The scene shifted. Far away, upon a shadowed overlook, a tall man with flowing hair observed the spectacle in silence. His eyes narrowed as he turned to the figure beside him, his leader. With a hesitant tone, he asked if they were truly certain about not intervening. The man he addressed exuded an unsettling aura. His eyes were strange, unnerving, carrying a depth that seemed to pierce through the world itself. In his hand, he held another cube, its surface faintly pulsing with hidden power. With calm detachment, he replied to his subordinate. There was no need for the higher ranks to act. This golden cube was not their true objective. Whatever happened inside, their path lay elsewhere. Still, he admitted, allowing others to explore it would not be without merit. Perhaps, if fortune favored them, something valuable might surface. Yet, as his gaze lingered on the glowing construct in the distance, his tone grew thoughtful, almost philosophical. The man with the strange eyes remarked that the word cube was merely a modern term. It could just as easily be called a box. A vessel, after all, is meant to hold something precious. After this strange scene, all the adventurers are already inside the golden cube, which has an unusual structure like not having doors or paths. Tanaka, the leader, orders everyone to begin exploring and stay alert since there must be some kind of trick. Quickly, the group discovers some strange murals. Tenchai approaches and begins to study them one by one. The first appears to be of monsters and humans fighting. The second is of a knight showing his loyalty to an angel in a ceremony. And the third has some strange and disturbing symbols that cannot be seen since the mural is very deteriorated. Above the three murals rose a disturbing figure, an angel trapped inside a cube. The image felt strangely familiar to Tenchai, as if he had seen it before on television. At that moment, Tanaka stepped into the scene with a solemn tone, explaining that the mark represented the Eye of Providence, also known as the Eye of God that sees all. No one fully understood why these symbols were here, but the group agreed they might hide crucial clues to unravel the dungeon's mystery. Suddenly, a voice thundered directly into their minds, chilling the adventurers' blood. The announcement was clear. The trial of strength was about to begin. An invisible countdown echoed, and with each number their bodies were filled with strange sensations that tightened their muscles and shook their nerves. Tanaka, holding his composure, ordered everyone to remain calm and form battle positions alongside those nearby. When the count reached 0, the hall was emptied. All the adventurers had vanished, leaving Tenchai completely alone. A cold realization struck him. They had not conquered the hall, but instead had been transported into separate trials. This golden cube followed no known rules, operating under its own sinister design. Before him, a cube suddenly appeared, floating in the air before vanishing. From its hollow emerged a grotesque creature. Its twisted body and yellowed fangs revealed it to be a hobgoblin, a monster common in rank E dungeons. For most adventurers, such an enemy was nothing more than a minor obstacle, but for Tenchai, who was unranked, it was a lethal threat. He had never defeated one before. Fear gripped his chest, though he forced himself to stand firm. He quickly deduced that the trial's purpose was to slay the monster. For others, it would have been child's play, but for him it was a chasm too wide. Remembering the reason he had come here, he tightened his grip on his sword and faced the creature head-on. Yet the hobgoblin moved with brutal speed. Tenchai knew one strike could end him, so he relied on instinct and dodged. Soon, he realized the creature's movements followed predictable patterns, repeating clumsily. If he could stay calm, he might anticipate its attacks. In that moment, he silently thanked the countless battles he had witnessed from the shadows, watching Sato and others. Perhaps that knowledge could grant him a chance. But his fragile confidence shattered when the monster unleashed a deafening roar. The cry broke his focus and lowered his guard. The following punch crashed into his stomach like a sledgehammer, knocking the breath from him and leaving him gravely wounded. Only then did he understand he had fallen under the hobgoblin's intimidation skill, which made his breathing heavy and his movements sluggish. The creature gave him no time to recover. It lunged again, and though Tenchai tried to block with his sword, it was knocked from his hands. The weapon spun away, out of reach, and in his desperation he stumbled and fell to the ground. Defenseless, the young man lay at the monster's mercy. The light of hope dimmed in his eyes. He felt trapped with no way out and bitterly accepted that it had always been impossible for someone like him. A useless, unranked weakling could never conquer such a cube. As the darkness of defeat closed in on him, the memory of his sister Nagi surfaced. Inwardly, with a broken whisper, he apologized for failing to keep his promise, surrendering to the weight of despair. When everything seemed lost, a spark of determination ignited deep within Tenchai. At the very last moment, he managed to react, raising his sword to block the monster's strike. With clumsy movements, he pulled out the supplies given by the association, a vial of black paint, which he hurled at the creature's face, blinding it for a few seconds, followed by lubricant that made its heavy steps slip. Seizing that brief opening, he retrieved his sword from the ground and, summoning every ounce of strength left in him, lunged forward. The blade came down with violent force, slicing through the hobgoblin and ending it with a single strike. The monster collapsed, and Tenchai, exhausted, fell as well. Before his fading vision, a notification flickered. He had cleared the trial. Yet his body no longer responded. The damage had left him completely paralyzed. As his consciousness began to fade, a voice suddenly pierced the haze, urging him to wake up. It was Tanaka's voice. With a hint of relief, Tanaka told him he had endured well and ordered Midori to treat Tenchai's wounds. Through ragged breaths, Tenchai managed to introduce himself. Tanaka asked about his rank and the kind of monster he had faced. Still weak, Tenchai answered, though his attention was drawn to the visible injuries marking Tanaka's body. Doubt gnawed at him. Had Tanaka also fought nothing more than a simple hobgoblin? The answer came swiftly. Tanaka revealed that his opponent had been a high ogre, a higher-class monster that even a rank adventurers struggled to defeat. With a grave expression, Tanaka remarked that it seemed each participant had been forced to fight against enemies that pushed them to the very edge of their limits. This was no ordinary trial, but something far stranger, as if someone or something was watching them from the shadows. Then, the voice echoed once more in their heads, cold and unyielding, declaring that only 15 adventurers had survived the first trial. The silence that followed was filled with disbelief. Most had perished. Faces Tenchai had seen just hours ago were gone. The reality felt too harsh, almost impossible to process. At last, the voice cut through the tension with its next announcement. The second challenge was about to begin. The trial of knowledge. The third trial begins, and without warning, the room transforms entirely. Strange markings appear on the floor, and one of the adventurers, visibly shaken, nervously asks what those strange figures mean. The symbols resemble a foot, an eye, and a torso, but the purpose is unclear. Tenchai studies them closely, wondering what kind of puzzle or riddle lies hidden behind these panels, or if perhaps they are part of some twisted quiz. Suddenly, a radiant beam of light erupts from the mural, specifically from the section depicting the angel. Out of nowhere, the bully Sato emerges again and forcefully shoves Tenchai aside to clear his path. Driven by his arrogance, Sato declares that striking first is the only way to win, planning to attack the statue before anyone else. However, when he launches a powerful strike at the angel statue, nothing happens. In fact, the opposite occurs. The statue appears to shift its stance, as if preparing to strike back. Sensing the danger, Tanaka quickly orders everyone to hold their positions and not break formation under any circumstances. Meanwhile, Sato frantically analyzes the situation. His attacks and magic seem useless against the statue. Nothing is working. Panic flickers in his eyes as he realizes he has no idea how to overcome this trial. In the middle of his thoughts, his sword slips from his hands and clatters to the ground. He stares in horror at his trembling fingers. His arms have suddenly gone limp, completely devoid of strength. Looking around, he sees that the same thing is happening to the other adventurer. All of them have lost the ability to move their arms. One of the adventurers can no longer raise her shield as the angel statue advances on her. Without hesitation or mercy, the statue places its blade on her shoulder and, in one swift motion, decapitates her, shocking everyone into stunned silence. Cries of terror erupt among the group, but Tanaka shouts at them to stay calm and maintain their distance from the angel. Then, without warning, their legs begin to falter, and everyone collapses to the floor. Tenchai notices that, while his arms have regained movement, his legs no longer respond. Fear and confusion ripple through the group. Tanaka, still trying to keep control of the situation, commands everyone to drag themselves away from the angel if they have to, crawling if necessary, but to keep their distance. Tenchai studies the floor again and realizes the truth. The strange panels beneath them are the source of this chaos. Depending on where someone steps, certain parts of their body stop functioning. All around him, people are being slaughtered, their heads severed in an instant. One of the adventurers mutters in dread about what might happen if their sight is taken away next. Meanwhile, Sato finds himself in an even worse predicament. He has become completely blind. In his panic, he stumbles onto the panel marked with the torso, and a sharp, unbearable pain racks his body, suggesting that his internal organs are shutting down. Hearing the desperate cries of the same person who once humiliated him, Tenchai hesitates. He reflects on whether helping Sato would be the right thing to do. His first instinct tells him to leave Sato to his fate, to let karma take its course. After all, survival is all that matters now, not for Sato, but for his sister Nagi. But then, an image of Nagi flashes in his mind. He remembers how she always saw him as a hero, as someone worth admiring and following. With that memory, his resolve shifts. Helping Sato, he realizes, is what someone truly strong would do. It is what a brother worthy of admiration. In fact, what a cool brother would choose. Tenchai moves forward with determination to save Sato. But almost immediately he realizes he can barely breathe. The panel beneath his feet is affecting him too, stealing the air from his lungs with every passing second. Even so, he summons his strength and plans to drag Sato toward the area marked with the foot symbol, convinced that doing so will restore their mobility. Yet just as he reaches out his hand to grab him, Sato betrays him without hesitation, shoving him aside and taking his place with a twisted, cynical smile. In that instant, Tenchai understands the cruel truth. He has been pushed onto the panel marked with the eye. Darkness swallows him whole, leaving him utterly blind. There is nothing but suffocating blackness, yet his instincts scream that the angel stands before him, ready to strike. Tenchai knows that if he doesn't act immediately, his life will end there. Amid this unbearable tension, Tanaka rushes to his aid, striking at the statue in an attempt to draw its attention, but his efforts are in vain. The angel lowers its blade onto Tenchai's shoulder, repeating the same deadly gesture it had used to execute the others. The cold edge presses against his skin, and with his heart racing, Tenchai realizes he has only a single chance to act. Caught in the darkness, he forces himself to think. His mind races through everything he has witnessed so far. The murals, the strange symbols, the image of the angel. There must be a hidden meaning. In a sudden flash of intuition, Tenchai kneels solemnly before the statue and bows his head in a gesture of loyalty. To everyone's astonishment, the angel slowly withdraws and spares his life. Breathing heavily, Tenchai explains to the others what he has discovered. The key lies in the posture of loyalty, for that is the answer to the trial of knowledge. The mural had been the clue all along. The first trial symbolized strength, the second symbolized wisdom, and its image showed an angel being honored by a knight bowing before it. With this revelation, Tanaka orders everyone to move toward the area marked with the hands. As the survivors crawl or stumble forward, Sato tries to follow, but the statue locks onto him instead. The angel charges, and though he narrowly avoids the first strike in sheer panic, his fear betrays him. His screams of despair echo across the chamber as he pleads that he does not want to die. But it is far too late. In the next instant, his head falls to the ground, severed without mercy. Tenchai watches the grim scene, a knot tightening in his chest. For a fleeting moment, he regrets being unable to save him. But deep down, he knows Sato's own betrayal sealed his fate. Still, there is no time to grieve. He must move forward, he must endure, and he must hope the others endure as well. The angel passes by him several times, terrifying in its presence, but eventually steps away once all the survivors reach the correct area, marking the end of the second trial. The American soldiers who endured the ordeal cheer loudly, showering Tenchai with words of gratitude in English that he cannot understand. Tanaka approaches and explains in a weary tone that they are simply thanking him for saving their lives. Yet Tanaka's expression darkens as he admits that he himself does not feel worthy. He confesses, almost bitterly, that as their commander he has failed, losing too many comrades he could not protect. Tenchai, his voice firm despite his exhaustion, encourages him. He insists that Tanaka is wrong, that without him, none of them would have survived, and expresses his own gratitude for all Tanaka has done. Moved by his words, Tanaka thanks him sincerely in return. Just 3 minutes pass after the end of the trial when the ominous voice resounds once again. The third and final challenge is about to begin, the trial of the heart. The remaining survivors, weary yet determined, agree to form groups of 3 before crossing the massive door that guards the final and most enigmatic trial. The atmosphere is heavy with silence, as though the dungeon itself were watching their every move. One of the American soldiers, his tone both firm and respectful, announces that he will form a team solely with his subordinates. He admits he would have liked to join Tenchai, believing the young man's apparent luck and composure would be an invaluable asset. However, since Tenchai does not seem to understand English and the situation demands perfect coordination, the soldier ultimately decides it is wiser to stay with his countrymen. Before departing, the soldier leader approaches Tenchai and politely asks his name. Tenchai gives it calmly, and he starts to think that his name might be a great and almighty name. But when the man learns that Tenchai is unranked, a stunned silence spreads among the Americans. The leader, visibly incredulous, remarks that what Tenchai has been doing is incredibly risky and reckless for someone of his level. But Tanaka steps in with his expression serious to remind them that it was this very boy who saved their lives during the previous trial, and that is something they cannot overlook, as not everything depends solely on skill or rank. Midori, who had remained quiet until now, breaks the tension with a direct question. Her voice carries a mix of worry and curiosity as she asks Tenchai why he agreed to venture into such a dangerous dungeon unprepared. It is at that moment that Tenchai decides to reveal the truth. In a low but steady voice, he confides that his sister, Nagi, suffers from AMS and that the disease has advanced to stage 3. That is why he risks everything, no matter the danger, to find a way to help her. The soldiers exchange glances heavy with empathy. Some mention that AMS is also spreading in the United States and has become a serious and growing problem. Tenchai's words stir memories among them. They begin pulling out photos of their families, gazing at them with nostalgia. Moved by the scene, the leader draws a deep breath and grants his subordinates permission to return home and spend time with their loved ones once the mission is complete. Once the groups separate, Tanaka instructs Midori and Tenchai to proceed with extreme caution. The darkness inside is nearly absolute, and the air feels cold, as if the place itself were breathing with them. Tenchai's heart pounds as he spots something glimmering in the distance and warns Tanaka that something feels off. As they approach, they discover a collar suspended in midair, floating like an omen in the void. Midori realizes that there is a path with a door in the end, hoping that if they open it, they can get out the place. But as they run, the path is blocked a big jail, and they got entrapped inside. Suddenly, a deep, thunderous voice reverberates throughout the chamber, commanding them to make an obligatory sacrifice as part of the trial. One of the three must put on the collar and be eliminated. Only then will the path forward open. Tanaka and Midori collapse to their knees, their faces contorted with disbelief and horror at the cruel absurdity of the challenge. Tenchai, trembling, murmurs to himself that he does not want to die, that he cannot end here. Yet behind him, Midori has taken on a darker expression. She grips a knife tightly and her eyes reflect a dangerous resolve, as though she is about to commit an irreversible act born of desperation. Tanaka, upon realizing what Midori was about to do, reacted instantly. With a swift and determined movement, he rushed toward her, seizing her trembling hands before the blade could strike. His voice, sharpened by both anger and disbelief, demanded to know what she thought she was doing. The weight in his tone carried not only fury but also desperation, as though he could not comprehend what she was about to embrace. Tenchai, startled, turned his head in time to witness the scene, his heart tightening as he understood that Midori had been on the verge of betraying him, attacking him from behind in a moment of panic and despair. Midori's face, twisted with anguish, erupted into screams. Her voice cracked as she cried that this was the only way, the sole path to escape the merciless trap that fate had set before them. Her words tumbled out in desperation, as if clinging to the last fragments of hope. But Tanaka, resolute and unwavering, knew that her reasoning was poisoned by fear. With firm resolve, he ripped the knife from her grasp, the metallic sound of it falling and clattering against the floor echoing. He hurled it far away, ensuring that she won't commit such an act. Turning to her, his expression softened with sorrow. He apologized to Midori in a voice laced with regret, acknowledging that it had been his fault for placing such unbearable pressure on her shoulders, for forcing her to even consider such a dreadful choice. And so, with a calm steadiness, he declared that he would remain behind, allowing her and Tenchai to continue onward. Midori's eyes overflowed with tears, her sobs filled with pain as she protested that this was not what she wanted, because without him by her side, she could not endure. Tanaka gathered her trembling body into his arms, holding her tightly in an embrace meant to shield her heart from breaking even as his own did. He whispered to her, begging her to understand the cruel necessity of their situation. He reminded her of his role as vice-guild leader, of the responsibility he bore. But then his voice softened further, carrying a tender weight as he told her to let him protect her not as a superior, but as her beloved husband. The words struck her like a cruel dagger of truth, revealing to Tenchai, confirming the bond they shared. Their marriage, a love story now on the verge of being torn apart, cast a shadow heavier than the trial itself. Midori clung to him, crying that she could not comprehend how fate had brought them to such a devastating crossroads, knowing all too well that she was seconds away from losing the man who meant everything to her. Meanwhile, Tenchai stood frozen, bearing silent witness to their tragedy. He sank into reflection, his thoughts pulling him back to the memory that haunted him most, the day of his parents' funeral. The weight of that day, etched deep into his soul, surged vividly before his eyes. He recalled holding Nagi, his fragile younger sister, in an embrace of grief and protection, so painfully similar to the way Tanaka held Midori now. In that parallel, Tenchai felt the raw truth of what it meant to lose someone irreplaceable. He loathed the hollow ache of that feeling, yet he also understood it more profoundly than anyone else. It was the one universal wound all humans shared, the terror of loss. The chamber fell silent, a suffocating stillness that pressed against their hearts. Then, Tanaka and Midori turned their eyes toward Tenchai, and their breath caught in shock. He had chosen to take their place. With quiet determination, he lifted the cursed collar and placed it upon himself. As the cold weight of the collar settled around his neck, Tenchai's face transformed. His eyes, calm and unwavering, glowed with an acceptance that was almost serene. He stood tall, gazing upward as if his spirit were reaching for someone far away for his sister, still confined to a hospital bed. In his thoughts, he admitted to her that for an unranked like him, surviving this long had been a miracle in itself. He felt pride in the luck that had carried him this far, gratitude that he had met someone like Mr. Tanaka, and comfort in knowing that through him Nagi's treatment would be assured. Lowering himself gently to the ground, Tenchai allowed his body to rest as his soul prepared to depart. He whispered to himself, burdened by the guilt of breaking his promise to apologize to Nagi. Still, he took solace in knowing that Tanaka would carry the story of his sacrifice to her, ensuring she would understand the love behind his action. His heart longed desperately to see her face one final time. In his mind, he imagined visiting her as a wandering ghost, and he wondered faintly if a heaven truly existed. With all these final thoughts circling within him, Tenchai was tranquil since he was ready to die for a good cause. But then, something extraordinary shattered the heavy silence. From above, a shining key descended, landing gracefully before them. It was the key to the door and the answer to the final trial. It seems that the cruel demand for sacrifice had been nothing more than an illusion, a merciless test of will. The truth now stood revealed. The trial had not been about death, but about courage, compassion, and the strength to endure until the end.